is Success Stories, a program of the Sorrell College of Business at Troy University. I'm your host, Alan Mendenhall, Associate Dean of the Sorrell College at Troy University and Executive Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy. Success Stories is a program that highlights the lives and careers of people who have accomplished great things, and my guest today is Andy Puzder, the former CEO of CKE Restaurants, which is the parent company of Carl's and Hardee's, and he is one such person who has accomplished great things. Andy, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Alan. It's good to be here.
Well, I want to start by asking about your background as an attorney. You and I are both attorneys by background and moved into different areas, but I'm curious how one moves from an attorney in private practice doing commercial litigation into the role of CEO of a publicly traded company.
Well, you probably wouldn't do it like I did it, but I'll tell you how I did it. I started out trying complex civil litigation, commercial cases. And as you know, when you try a lawsuit, you have to learn as much about that particular business as the people in the business, because you're going to have people on the witness stand that you'll examine or cross-examine, and you don't want them to have a leg up on you. So you really, it's a crash course on businesses. And you finish one case, you move to another business. So you're making these lateral movements, but you're gaining knowledge as you go. At some point, I started that in 1978. By 1991, 92, I had a couple of clients who were very wealthy people, and they said, "We want you to be our full-time attorney, not just for when we're sued. We'd like you to get involved in our businesses." And so I started representing rich guys, I guess, instead of being out trying lawsuits. And then you kind of get knowledge of you learn a lot about the underlying businesses. I was general counsel at Fidelity National Financial, EVP and general counsel, and then the same at CKE Restaurants. I had represented the founder, Carl Karcher, in a lawsuit in 1986, and by 1997 I became general counsel of both those companies, Fidelity and CKE Restaurants. And whenever there were meetings with the operations people, I would always speak up. When we bought Hardee's, they wanted to turn Hardee's into Carl's Jr. There was a meeting in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. I looked around the table of people. I was just visiting the meeting. I was there for other reasons. I had negotiated the deal, and I was there to fire lawyers. They had too many lawyers in-house at Hardee's. But I went to this meeting, and they were talking about turning Hardee's into Carl's Jr., and I said, I'm the only one at the table here that isn't from California, and I think people are going to say, "Who's Carl Jr. and where's my Hardee's?" And everybody laughed and said, "Andy, go buy a company, go do something." And so I did. I went and we cut a deal with Chicago Title. Fidelity bought Chicago Title. And about 2 years later, I came back, and the stock for Carl's, which had gone up to $42 a share when they bought Hardee's, had sunk to about $2. And so there was a big panic as what we're going to do. They took a big loan out to buy Hardee's, and it was I think we had 23 banks in our line of credit, and half of them had us in workout, which of course means they want to be paid today. So I went to a board meeting. I walked in, and the board of directors was in the corner, and Bill Foley, who was the chairman of the board, called me over and said, "Andy, come here." So he said, "Well, you're going to be the president of Hardee's." I said, "I'm going to be what?" He said, "We're going to make you the president of Hardee's." I said, "What? What are you talking about?" And then a guy, Byron Allenbaugh, used to run Ralph's Market in California, came over and said, "No, Bill, if he's going to be the president, he's going to be president and CEO. We've got to give him a chance to see what he can do with this." And I said, "Guys, why would you do this?" And they said, "Well, you were the only guy that knew this wouldn't work." And so I ended up being I think they wanted me to take it into bankruptcy or sell it, which would be more consistent with what I'd been doing in my career to that point. But I got in there, and after a couple of weeks, I said, I think I can fix this. And if I sell it, if we go into bankruptcy or we sell it, it's going to hurt the employees, it's going to hurt the franchisees, it's going to hurt the supplier, our consumers who like us. It's really going to be a devastating blow to a lot of people financially. I think maybe we can fix it. Now, of course, we did, and I kept that position for 17 years instead of the year that everybody was predicting in the press at the time.
Well, you've become an outspoken critic, as have I, of ESG, the environmental, social, and governance movement, in particular ESG investment, but also in the management styles that emanate from the stakeholder model over the shareholder model. I'm curious if you saw that movement developing while you were CEO. Did you see that in your everyday work? Did you see that when you were at Fidelity? Was it in an embryonic stage at that point? How did that
Not really. I retired. I stopped being the general counsel at Fidelity when I took over as CEO at Hardee's, and then Carl Jr., then CKE Restaurants, the holding company, in 2000. And I stayed in that position until 2017. And the answer is no. There was some, we were in California, and there was some pressure to do, but from the government, not from anybody else, there was some pressure to do environmental type things. And you know, you did them when you could. You did them if they made economic sense. You didn't, if they didn't make economic sense, then you didn't do them unless the government compelled you to do them. So it really didn't start until after that with any kind of momentum. It started with a letter that Larry Fink put out, I think in 2018 actually, that where he kind of called on companies to look beyond their profitability, look beyond their shareholder returns, which was a huge mistake. But that seemed to really catch fire at that point.
And the Business Roundtable, of course, redefining or purporting to redefine the purpose of corporations in 2019 from that shareholder to stakeholder model, I think was another
but I think that was baloney. I think that's not real. There is a thing called stakeholder capitalism. They try and use it to, because now ESG's become such a polluted term that they want to use terms like conscientious capitalism or stakeholder capital to hide what they do. You know, the left is very good at hiding what it does. They went from Marxist to communist to socialist to, you know, progressives to global. You know, they just change the name whenever people figure out what they're doing. Well, people have figured out what they're doing with ESG, so they're looking for different names. But stakeholder capitalism, the way the Business Roundtable did it, and I think it was really just a way to try and keep Larry Fink and the guys at Vanguard and State Street and BlackRock off their backs. But it really said, we're going to not focus on shareholders. We're not going to focus on returns for shareholders. We're going to focus on employees, consumers, employees, our suppliers, and our communities. Well, what idiot CEO doesn't, if you want to generate a profit, what idiot CEO doesn't focus on consumers? I mean, and you have to focus on your employees. They're your most important asset. And you certainly focus on your suppliers, or guess who they give the best deals to? Your competitors, right? So you, particularly during a pandemic, this could be a devastating event. And then everybody knows you have to be liked in your community. So really all the Business Roundtable's version of stakeholder capitalism said was, we're not going to focus on investor returns. We're going to focus on the things that any CEO would focus on to generate investor returns. We're just going to call it something else and kind of look like we're good guys. But and if you look, there's been studies on it since. Not one company changed what they were doing based on stakeholder capitalism. All of the people that signed this stakeholder capitalism commitment didn't change their conduct at all. And the reason they didn't change it is because that's what you have to do to generate profits in the first place. And you even had places like, let's take Starbucks or Amazon, big signers, progressive companies, leftists, promoting. What happened when their employees, the number two stakeholder, what happened when they wanted to unionize? Did they say, you know what, shareholders, we're going to make less money because we're going to let our employees unionize. They're going to get better wages, but you're going to get less returns. We're sorry, but we're going to be good guys. We're going to be stakeholder capitalists. No, they fought unionization like hell, like it was a disease. So I think stakeholder capitalism as put forth by the Business Roundtable was a ruse.
Well, Andy, where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Cleveland, Ohio, in an area with Russell, Ohio, which is right, and then we moved to Chagrin Falls, Ohio, sort of about 15 miles east of Cleveland.
I was just in Cleveland about a month and a half ago and didn't realize how beautiful it was. I had a terrible notion of what it was, and I stayed in this beautiful hotel, looked over the Brown Stadium and the lake. It was a nice city.
Well, I tell you, I didn't realize how nice it was till I went back for the convention in 2016. When I went to school, I graduated from Cleveland State University downtown and lived in Cleveland Heights. We had a little place we rented in Cleveland Heights when I was in college. My wife and I had a couple kids. But I went to Cleveland State, and you worried driving to work. I mean, I didn't realize how close Cleveland State was to the Terminal Tower, which is like the Empire State Building of Cleveland. It's that big building in downtown Cleveland. But I walked from the Terminal Tower to Cleveland State during the convention. It was like just a few blocks. But at that point, there were women and kids doing this. You wouldn't have made that walk with a gun, back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, it was a dangerous place. They've really turned the city around. It always had been a beautiful city. There was a lot of wealth there, kind of during the Gilded Age and after, with a lot of Rockefeller started there. There's even the Rockefeller building there. Cyrus Eaton started there. There was a lot of wealth, and you can see that in the buildings and the way things were laid out. It just went to heck, beginning in probably in the late 50s, early 60s.
Well, you can definitely see signs of that prosperous era. And what did you study when you were in college?
I did 2 years at Kent State University. I actually went in, I was going to major in music because I made my money to get through college playing in bands. And I decided that really wasn't for me, and I majored in art my first year. And then I decided that wasn't for me either. This was going nowhere. So I switched to pre-law. And I went one semester after the students were shot.
Oh, wow.
And then I took 3 years off and played in bands because I ran out of money. And then I went back to Cleveland State. They didn't have a pre-law program, so I majored in history.
Do you still play music?
Not so much. I have a son who's an incredible guitar. I actually have two sons who are really extremely good musicians, good guitar players, one who plays piano. But I don't anymore. I got some arthritis in my fingers, which means they move slower.
And what, did you play guitar?
Yeah, guitar, bass, vocals. Mostly I could sing harmony and I could sing lead, and that was like, look, growing up in the home of rock and roll, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, if you could play guitar and sing, and you had a couple of buddies who could play guitar or play drums or piano and sing, you were working 3-4 nights a week every week. There were 300 bars you could play in. Everything was live music back then.
Well, I did not know this about you. I knew the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was right there in Cleveland because I saw it, but I did not know that we might see your presence in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Well, you never will see my presence there, but I did make enough money to pay for college and law school with a wife and kids and a family. So.
Well, tell me about law school. What was law school like for you? Because some people love law school, some people hate law school. What was your experience as a law student?
Well, I was a student. You weren't allowed to work your first year, but I had to work because I have a wife and kids. And so for me, it was getting up in the morning, going to law school, getting home. I had a job reading tax court transcripts at night, and then I decided that I was going to be on Law Quarterly. So I wrote my way onto Law Quarterly and was the senior editor my final year. So for me, it was a lot of work, but I loved law school. I wish that I didn't have any family money. I didn't have any government programs that would have applied to me. So I had to work my way through and use my savings up and work to make sure everybody ate until my last year. And I did get a loan my last year from a bank, not from the government. That's when banks used to make these loans. So you really couldn't over borrow because the bank wouldn't let you get tremendously in debt. This is before, during the Obama era, when the federal government took over these loan programs and students became shovels, where they were shoveling money from the government into the schools.
Well, and
this was before then. Yeah.
Universities elevated tuition in conjunction with
But my last year I did get a loan. But other than that, it was hard work. But I loved law school. I loved the law. I really thought I would be a lawyer forever. I never planned on being a CEO, nor did I. And I was surprised when they wanted to make me one. And
then your first job out of law school, what was that?
I got a job with a law firm called the Law Offices of Morris A. Schenker, and I law clerked at his office my second and third years of law school. Morris was a really interesting guy, a Russian immigrant, got shot by the Soviets swimming across the Volga to get out of Russia, came to Detroit under the name Moishe Greenberg, finally got down to St. Louis, where he worked in a grocery store. Within, I think it was 3 or 4 years, he owned 2 grocery stores. And he took the rapid transit, we would have called it in Cleveland, I don't know what they called it in St. Louis, to get to St. Louis University every day. And the Jesuit priests made him learn a word of English every day on the way to school, so that they let him go there. And then he went to Washington University Law School, as I did. But then became like the public defender in St. Louis. Like he would defend anybody, because there was no public defender back then. And he got his law degree, in the 20s, in the late 20s, early 30s, so during the Depression. By 1940, I think it was 47, the court in St. Louis had to order him to hire associates because he had like every criminal case.
Oh, wow.
So they had like 3-4 divisions that were trying criminal cases, and they could only try one at a time.
Did you ever do any criminal work, or mostly just
civil? I did a little criminal work, not much. By the time Morris, then he represented Jimmy Hoffa. He was Jimmy Hoffa's lawyer on all the Supreme Court cases. Had some very, very famous cases that went to the Supreme Court, was an amazing criminal lawyer, but his firm became more of a civil trial firm. He ended up owning a controlling interest in the Dunes Hotel in Las Vegas, which is now where the Bellagio sits, but it used to be the Dunes Hotel, was the first high-rise in Vegas. And I ended up being hired by the law firm, but mostly I ended up representing him. I did some cases in St. Louis, but it was representing Morris and the Dunes Hotel, and it was really quite an experience. I had this incredibly experienced trial lawyer sitting next to me in these cases where he was sued, who would be telling me sort of what to do or what to. And it was a great learning experience. I really learned how to try cases there, and I worked there got a law school I was law clerk in '76, got out in '78, worked there until '84, and then went with another law firm in St. Louis where I stayed till 1991, and then I went with a firm in California.
And how long were you CEO of CK Restaurants?
From June of 2000 until, well, September of 2000 for the holding company. June was Hardee's. September 2000 until April of 2017, I retired.
So 17 years, roughly.
Yep.
That seems like a long tenure these days. I noticed that CEOs are starting to become like university college presidents or university football coaches, where they're at max they're 5 years and out, but 17 years is a pretty good tenure for.
They're on their third CEO since I left. So,
yeah, wow, and that's 6 years.
Yeah.
So, how about that? Well, did you ever expect that you would become an author? Because you've written books. How many books have you written now? 3?
I co-wrote one and wrote one by myself, and I'm working on a third.
Okay, and did you ever? I mean, when did you decide that might be a pursuit?
I also wrote some pamphlets for Encounter Books as well,
right,
particularly during the pandemic. And I've written. I started writing art. I've always enjoyed writing. It was something that I really liked to do, which is why I was on Law Quarterly and my note published when I was a senior at WashU. And then in the early 2000s, I started writing opinion pieces for various newspapers. Ended up eventually writing a lot for the Wall Street Journal. I worked for the Washington Post for a while, for Real Clear Politics, for Fox News, for for the National Review. So I enjoy the writing, and then it occurred to me that that you really couldn't. When you write an op-ed, it's generally 800 to 900 words, and so you really got to be succinct. So I decided some of these issues required more discussion, such as the first book was about job creation at a time when, during the Obama presidency in 2010, when we were not creating jobs, and I thought I had some insights as to why. So an economist and I co-wrote a book on job creation. And then I wrote The Capitalist Comeback when President Trump was elected, predicting that under President Trump and his pro-free market policies of low taxes, low regulation, focus on domestic energy production, that we would see an economic boom, which we did. We saw low interest rates, low unemployment, wages growing faster than inflation, right to the pandemic. So anyway, I kind of historically described that in The Capitalist Comeback, but also the subtitle was, the book was The Capitalist Comeback and the Trump boom and the left's plot to stop it. And the left's plot to stop it worked pretty well. I mean, the pandemic helped them, but when Biden came in, he just killed all of Trump's policies, and you can see what happened in the economy. People have spent their savings, which were, it's like they had, I think it was $6.8 trillion in savings in March of 2021. It's now down to about 700 billion. They've maxed out credit cards, where 51% of people can't pay their credit card debt at the end of the month, and we've got over $1 trillion in credit card debt, which we've never had before. And Bank of America reported in second quarter that they had 36% increase in people making hardship withdrawals from their 401k plans. So we're now at a point where there's been a lot of consumer spending, but it's people spending their savings, their credit cards, and their retirement benefits because wages have not kept up with inflation. So it's bad. That's a long answer to your question about writing books. I am working on a third book on ESG and how it's really socialism in sheep's clothing. So we'll see where that goes.
Which is the title of the talk that you're going to give this evening to students at Troy University. I've always found it's back to the pandemic point. I've always found it somewhat perverse that Klaus Schwab in his book on the Great Reset referred to the pandemic repeatedly as an opportunity. That seemed to me to be sort of an ugly way of portraying a pandemic.
But he's not alone. I mean, President Biden said, as did a number of Democrats, that the pandemic was an opportunity to remake America. I mean, this is something that we're very open about. They wanted to remake America, and if we don't step up pretty soon here, hopefully 2024, they might just be successful, and we will never be the prosperous, peaceful country that we were prior to the Biden presidency. Between the Obama years and the Biden years, I think we may be getting in a ditch so deep that it's hard to lift ourselves out. Now, I hope that's not true. The power of entrepreneurship and free market capitalism is astonishing. I mean, really has lifted. Even Barack Obama in 2015 spoke at Georgetown University and said, we don't dispute that free market capitalism has created more wealth than any economic system in history and has lifted billions of people out of poverty. I think that's almost a direct quote. Well, why would you mess with that? Why would you mess with a system that took us from years of like, I don't know, 94% of people living in extreme poverty to a point where we're now at 8 or 9% in extreme. Why would you change that? I mean, it's very strange.
And no system is going to yield absolutely perfect results, but you would think you would want to stick with the system that has yielded the most measurable benefits for the most people over time, and that, I agree with you, is free market capitalism.
The only system that's ever successfully addressed the issue of poverty. There is no other system that has done that, and so until somebody comes up with a system that rationally will do so, I think all these collectivist approaches to the economy, socialism, now ESG, or conscientious capitalism or stakeholder capitalism, are just ruses to try and empower an entrenched elite, either financial or government elites, so that they can tell us how to live our lives.
Well, you're now 73 years old, correct?
Yes.
And doing a lot of speaking. In fact, we were together in Dallas not very long ago, and then in Amelia Island after that. And I don't think we saw each other when we were in Amelia Island, but we were both there at the same event. And I know you are here in Montgomery, Alabama after a series of stops speaking. Have you enjoyed sort of the lecture circuit?
Well, I do. My wife keeps asking me when this retirement thing starts. I did take the summer off, but man, I really overbooked myself this fall. But in any event, I will never turn down an opportunity to speak to students, particularly college students, high school students or college students, because they aren't going to hear the truth about free market capitalism, other than maybe in your courses at your school. There are very few schools where they actually get an exposure to the positive aspects of free market capitalism, and are told that socialism is somehow a benevolent system that it benefits the poor, when it in fact does not. It's just the opposite. It creates poverty. It doesn't alleviate poverty.
And when you have the opportunity to meet with students one-on-one, as you will this afternoon, what kinds of advice do you give to students, to young people who are looking for careers, maybe not even necessarily political advice, but just practical advice about what they want to do with their lives?
I do get a question of like, how do you successfully run a company? Like, what were the keys? What did you do that turned CKE around? And it's really not very complicated. I think I tell them, first you have to have a vision. You have to have, how are you going to convince the world that what you have is something they want and they need? Because the beauty of the capitalist system is that the way you succeed under capitalism is by meeting the needs of other people. You've got to meet the needs of your consumers. You've got to come up with products they want at a price they can afford. So you need a vision to do that, or a vision that presents your products in a way that they look appealing to consumers. And consumers, they vote with every dollar they spend as to whether you succeed or fail. You want them to vote for your success. The second thing is hire the best people you possibly can find. So get a vision, hire the best people you can find to execute that vision. And then thirdly, make sure those people have what they need to succeed, and get the heck out of the way. And I think that if you're going to run a company, you're going to run a business, you're going to start a business, if you can do those three things, you will succeed.
And so it may not matter as much what they choose for a course of study as it does these other skills.
I think the course of study is good in helping you develop a vision about something, because the more things you're exposed to, but you don't need to get that in college, quite honestly. You can get that out there working. You may be working a job and all of a sudden you get an insight, hey, we ought to do this way, or I bet if our company had this product, it would be much more successful. And then you can kind of build a business around that, which is the way a lot of businesses have started. Very, very famous businesses like the one started by Henry Ford or Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos. These are just guys that had other jobs and came up with an idea.
And are you done with the business world completely now, other than in other than your speaking engagement, speaking about business? Are you done working in business or serving on boards?
Serving on boards, I'm not doing that right now, and I've turned down opportunities to do that because I don't have time. But I think if I got the right, I was offered the right opportunity, and I thought it would be something that I could get really interested in, I probably would do it. But you know, I'm not going to do what I did. I'm not going to take a company like CKE and start all over again and fix it. I think I've been there, I've done that, and I enjoy the speaking. And as long as young Americans are interested in hearing what I have to say, I'll probably continue to give the talks.
Well, I appreciate the talks. I'm very grateful to you for giving the talks, and I'm grateful to have you here at Troy University today to speak to our students on the Troy campus.
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here.
This has been a program of success stories. Thank you for watching.